Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. It's a bill that's been taxing the abilities of the Local Government and Environment Committee for some time now, and it's a great pleasure for my fellow committee members, I'm sure, to see this bill progress to the second reading. It's a relatively uncontroversial bill that we're happy to support, and it's been well, Mr Mallard's questions whether in fact it is uncontroversial.
There's a good report to caucus on that.
Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see about that. It's been very pleasurable, if a little soporific, to hear the colleagues from Hamilton recounting good times past at Parana Park, and it's clearly a great asset to the city and the citizens of Hamilton, and it's good to be seeing this legislation pass through the House, tidying up the legislative basis for Hamilton City Council's ownership and administration of the park. I want to just make a comment about Clause 5, which really makes it so that the Parana Park land is no longer subject to the conditions of the will of the long-deceased George Parr. This is really a kind of an empowering provision that greatly simplifies the situation for Hamilton City, repeals the existing legislation, and just vests the fee simple in Hamilton City. So this is really an empowering clause, and Sir, I think that it's fair to observe that that it stands in stark contrast to the general thrust of local government policy of this government, which is, you'd have to say, disempowering of local government and local communities. And over the last couple of years, Sir, we've seen many examples of that, the tendency of this government to take power away from local communities and put it in the hands of their hand-picked friends. We saw it in the Auckland super city, where the fundamental thrust of three very big complex pieces of law passed in this House was to take power away from the elected representatives of the community and vest them in really hand-picked corporate boards, who in the case of Auckland will be responsible for managing some 3/4 of the city's assets and resources. We saw it in the Local Government Amendment Act passed towards the end of last year, that again took power away from communities. It took away the right to be consulted on a number of important issues for the community. For instance, before services that have been delivered by councils could be contracted out to the private sector, something that many New Zealanders care about, an issue that's important to people. But what that policy did, what that law change did, was that it took away the right of communities to be consulted. So there are many other examples, Sir, but I think that it's worth just reflecting that this simple, uncontroversial bill that we're debating today it makes life easier for Hamilton City. It gives them the elected representatives of the community of Hamilton, it gives them more power, really, to serve their citizens in managing this important community asset, and that stands in contrast to the general thrust of local government policy under this government. Clause 6 says that the council is to hold this land as a recreation reserve, that provides that the land will be subject to the Reserves Act. And that's an incredibly important piece of legislation, and it reflects a deeply held conviction by New Zealanders that parkland is somehow special. It is an asset that we hold in trust for future generations, that our communities cannot be livable, Sir, unless we have adequate recreation land available to people, whether it's sporting reserves or whether it's native bush or beaches, the volcanic cones in Auckland, lakes and streams, that assets like Parana Park are vital for the well-being of our kids and our families, and that we hold them in trust for future generations. And that, Sir, that belief, that value runs very deep in the New Zealand community, and that is why people are fundamentally suspicious of this government's agenda around the privatisation of publicly owned assets. And we've seen it in Auckland, sir. We've seen it in the intense public reaction against Rodney Hyde taking away the right of Aucklanders to decide in a binding referendum whether or not the ports of Auckland should be privatised. He took away that right that existed in law for Aucklanders to decide in a referendum about whether or not the ports of Auckland should be privatised. We saw it with water, sir, which is another asset that has a kind of a special sacred place. New Zealanders think that water is too important to be privately owned and subject and driven by the profit motive. And what did we see last year? We saw Rodney Hyde open up municipal water supply to private ownership and private control through PPPs. Legislation deliberately crafted to encourage private ownership, sir. And what I contend, sir, is that parkland is just like parkland, like Parana Park, is in the public mind. It is accorded a special status, and but it's not. In the view in the hearts of New Zealanders, it's not just parkland that deserves that special status, sir. There are many other assets that traditionally we own and manage in the public interest, and this government doesn't seem to understand that, sir, and is hell-bent on opening up those precious assets to privatisation and private control. Clause 9 is also very interesting, sir, and it deals with the powers of the Registrar-General of Land. The clause authorises the Registrar-General to make such entries in the land transfer registers as are necessary to give effect to the bill. A seemingly innocuous provision that delegates a very specific power to a public servant. And that's perfectly normal, sir. That's perfectly normal that the Registrar-General of Land is empowered to administer and make the changes that are necessary to give effect to the bill. But that's very unlike, sir, many other changes and policies that this government has implemented in local government, which muddy the division between public servants and between elected officials. It's one thing, sir, for this bill to empower the Registrar-General of Land to make these quite minor administrative changes, but it's a whole different thing, sir, for this government to give important political and decision-making powers to unelected officials, which is exactly what's happened in Auckland with the creation of the Māori Statutory Board. It's quite a different thing, sir, and no one would object, sir, to the Registrar-General of Land being given these specific powers, because that person's a public servant. And it's a very minor thing that he or she is being asked to do. But that is quite different. It's quite different to the management of huge publicly owned assets and resources that has been handed to hand-picked corporate boards by this government in Auckland. And this government doesn't seem, sir, to understand, there's a very important distinction to be made, sir, between the powers of elected officials, accountable to the community, accountable to the people who elected them. That's why the community in Auckland wanted to see democratically elected Māori representation. And that's quite different to handing over political power and wide-ranging powers to hand-picked corporate boards, which seems to be the particular penchant, shall we say, or penchant, depending on which side of the tracks, you went to school on, sir. So I think this board, this legislation, sir, highlights some very interesting issues about this government's discharge of its responsibilities in the whole area of local government. And I'm glad, sir, that we're able to stand up here today and support...
Sorry to interrupt the member.
He's going to rule